Hey everybody, Rob here at Detroit.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster 7-wire to 6-wire Flexo-Coiled wiring kit. Now if you do want to flat tow your Jeep behind your motorhome, so that way we can get to the campsite and go out to eat, maybe run an errand without having to take our motor home. But the problem comes in, we have to have those signals just like when you're towing a trailer so we can safely get down the road and make sure everybody around us knows what's going on. And the advantage of our diodes is it is going to allow us to get those signals to the back of our taillights, and it's going to use our factory taillights and bulbs, so we're not going to have to worry about an extra bulb inside of our lens or using magnetic lights. Now magnetic lights do work, but we're going to have to find somewhere to put them on our Jeep, run the wire up to the back of our motorhome, and then while we're driving down the road, that wire bouncing up and down, rubbing against the paint, could eventually scratch it. And our diodes, though, as you can see, they're not going to change any kind of outward appearance of our Jeep. They're just going to allow us to get those signals when we're towing, but our Jeep is going to act completely normal when we're not towing. Now, another big benefit of using diodes when you're flat towing your vehicle is it's going to protect our Jeep's electrical system. If there was a problem on the motorhome end, our diodes are going to protect our Jeep and not let any kind of backfeeding go in and cause any damage. Now, we're obviously going to have a way to get those signals from our motorhome to the diodes, and that's where the Flexo-Coil cable is going to come into play. What I really like about it is the fact that it is coiled, so when we need that length, it can extend out, but when we don't need it and we're just sitting or possibly just driving down the road, it's going to keep all that slack up off the ground, so it's not going to drag and cause any damage to it. On one end, we're going to have a 7-way that's going to plug into the back of your motorhome, and on the other end, we're going to have a 6-way that'll plug into the plug that we mount on the front of our Jeep. Now, one thing I do want to mention is the way Roadmaster has the Flexo-Coil cable wired up is the center pin on our 6-way is going to be your 12-volt power source. There are two different industry standards, so you want to keep that in mind. Now, our Roadmaster diode kit is going to come with everything you need to get hooked up. However, once we installed ours, we did find that we needed about 5 to 8 feet of extra wire, and that's really just going to depend on how you route your wire. So I always suggest just picking up a little bit of extra 16-gauge wire, and if you don't need it, you always have it on hand for something else. But when we do go to install it, we are going to be required to remove our taillights and tap into the electrical system. Some customers may be a little bit nervous about that, but we'll walk you through how to test each one of the wires, identify each one, and show you how we routed everything. In fact, let's go and do that together now. To begin installation, you want to find the spot that you're going to be mounting your wiring to the front of your Jeep. Now in our application, we have a spot that's already attached to our base plate. That's why we have this bracket here. We're going to make sure you leave at least a couple inches outside the bracket so you have enough room to wire up the plug, but then we want to route this all the way back towards the back of our taillights. And we just passed our wire through, we went around below our base plate and came underneath the skid plate right here in the front. We came out of our skid plate, we went right over this subframe brace, followed our control arm along the way. You want to be careful to avoid any kind of heat sources or moving parts. So we went over all of that, we came out to the outer edge, actually went right behind our heat shield here because our exhaust is extremely close. And we just followed the existing lines. And once we got to about here, we went underneath this cover on the outside, following it along, and we shot our wire all the way to the outside, going along the outside of the fuel tank, going over the filler neck, came to the rear suspension, went all the way to the top, going over everything so we wouldn't have to worry about any moving parts. And then once we got to the back here, we just followed along some existing wiring, and I went ahead and put a loom clamp right here at the bottom of the floor. That way it's not going to be hanging down because there's nothing here to attach it to. Then we have our last anchor point right here at the back of the bumper. What we need to do now is we need to take our wire and we need to separate them all so they're 4 individual wires. The easiest way to do that is if you take a pair of cutters on the very end, just snip the end and then we can peel them all apart. Whenever you're cutting these, you want to be extremely careful. You want to try to get in between the wires and not cut the wire themselves. You just want to separate them. If you do cut just a little bit of the wire, that's alright, because we can always fix it and just cut the end of it off. But we want to separate all of our wires as far up to that last anchor point as we can get it. We'll do that for all 4 of our wires. Now that all the wires are separated, we want to open up our rear hatch and we need to remove both of our taillights. Now if we come into the center section right where the door is, we'll have two push pin fasteners that are going to be holding in our taillight. There's a small notch on there. You want to get a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool. Come underneath that notch, pop out the center section. That'll take the tension off the clip and we'll be able to pull that center section out, then come underneath the base and pull the rest of it out. Now, these can be a little tight, so you want to make sure that the whole push pin comes out and you don't break it, but we're going to go and repeat that for all the rest of the push pins that we have left. Now once you have the push pins out, you want to pull your taillight out, but there are some alignment pins on the sides, so you don't want to wiggle it too much side to side, you want to go straight back. So I find it easiest if you grab the edge of the taillight and push backward, kind of working at it, because again those pins are in there. Don't want to push too much. Once you have your taillight loose, we'll find our connectors. Your red tab, we're going to slide that away from the taillight. We'll push down the black tab, pull it out. We'll do the same thing for the one below. We'll have a third one on the very bottom, again with a little red tab. We'll push on the gray tab to disconnect it. Now on the very bottom one, we're going to have a gray plug. This one we can actually just turn counterclockwise. We'll pull the whole bulb out. And we'll go set our taillights aside where they won't get damaged. And we'll pull the other side out as well. At this point, you want to turn your headlights. You want to make sure that's the only lights that are on. That way we can isolate our taillight signal within our connectors. Now we already know that it's not going to be this bulb because nothing's on. So we need to check both of these connectors and see which pin is corresponding to our taillight signal. So we can start with our large one. Checking through with my tester, I'm not getting any signal. So move over to the small connector. And here you can hear I am getting a signal. And if we look at the pin, it's going to be the one closest to that red tab. And if we follow the back side of it, it's going to be that white wire with the gray stripe. And you need to write that down or remember that, and we're going to test the other side and verify that it's in the same location. Now we're going to want to turn our headlights off. If you have somebody with you, you're going to want to have them press on the brake pedal with no other lights on so we can isolate the brake signal. If you don't have anybody with you, the easiest thing that I found is you can actually take a large bar, put it in between the pedal and the seat, that way there's some pressure on the brake pedal. But we'll go through and we'll double check all of our pins again. So now we're getting a signal on the large connector, and if we look at the wire it's coming off of, it's going to be the white wire with the brown stripe on it. So that's going to be our left-hand brake signal. We're going to verify that on the other side as well. Now over on the passenger side, they are in the same locations. Our tail light is going to be the white wire with an orange stripe on our small connector, and our brake and turn signal is still going to be on the large connector, and it's the white wire with the tan or brownish colored stripe. So in the same connectors, in the same positions, it's just a different color wire. Now that all of our wires have been identified, we need to get our new wiring up to here so we can make our connections. So to help me out, I'm going to be using an airline tube. I'm just going to pass it down between the body and the bumper here. Pass it all the way down until I can get next to my other wires down there. We'll take some tape and attach it to it. Now if you don't have an airline tube, you can use just about whatever you have available, whether it's a coat hanger or even with a string with something heavy attached to it so you can drop it down. You're going to want to come underneath, find your pull wire. And once you have your airline tube or whatever you're using to help you get it up through the bottom, we want to take our yellow wire and our brown wire and we're going to attach it to the end of it. I'm just going to use some electrical tape. That way I don't have to worry about it letting go while I'm pulling it up and getting stuck in between the body. And we'll just grab the other end of our airline tube and start pulling it up towards the top. Now, I do want to mention you kind of want to be mindful of how your wires are coming up, because our exhaust is going to be close to the bottom. So you just want to watch how they come up and avoid the exhaust as much as you can. But you want to pull all the slack up. What I usually like to do is I'll take my excess wire here and I'm going to actually anchor it to the factory wires so it won't drop back down. Now you want to pull back some of the tape on your wires, just a few inches, that way we can expose the wires inside. Now we're going to start with our large connector, the white and brown wire, and if you remember, that was our brake signal. So we're going to come downstream just a bit from the connector, and we're going to cut that wire in half and strip back both ends. We can grab one of our diodes. We want to grab the one that has all blue spade connectors on it. Take two of them off. It really doesn't matter which ones we grab. We just want to grab two of the blue connectors. We're going to crimp them onto the end of each one of our wires. Now we can take our diode, we'll remove the last one on there. And if we look at our diode, we're going to have two terminals on one side and one on the other. Now the two, it'll say in, and the one's going to go out. The one that's out is going to go closest to the connector, so we'll take that wire, slide our spade terminal in, and then the other wire is going to go into one of the in terminals. It really doesn't matter which one, just want to make sure it has a solid connection. Now we're going to grab our yellow wire. I always like to give myself a little bit of extra, so we'll estimate about how much wire we need, cut the excess off, and then we're going to strip back the end of it and we'll crimp on our last spade terminal. Well, let's take our wire and plug it into our diode. So this is what your brake and turn signal diode should look like. We'll have one wire that's going through our diode to the connector, and we'll have our yellow wire going into the other inside. Now we should have our taillight connector. It's going to be the white wire with the gray stripe. And we're going to do the same thing, cut the wire in half and strip back both ends. Except this time we want to grab the diode that has the yellow connector on it. We're not using it just yet, so we'll still grab both the blue connectors off of our diode. And we'll crimp them on just like we did with the other one. And just like the other one, we'll take our last connector off. Make sure the connector closest to the plug goes into the out. The one farthest goes into one of the ends. Just like the other one, we'll grab our brown wire. We're going to estimate about how much wire we need. Again, give yourself a little bit of extra. We'll cut our wire, except this time we want to hold on to the excess wire here, and we're going to strip back both ends of our brown wire. Now what we want to do is we want to combine both the wires together. We'll grab our yellow spade connector. And the whole reason why they give you this yellow one is because it's a little bit larger, so it's easier to fit two wires inside. Slide it into the connector, and we'll crimp it in place. And just like the other one, we're going to take this connector, plug it directly into the other inside on our taillight diode. Now the only difference is we're going to take the excess brown wire that's still free on the other end, and we're going to pass it down back through the body so it can meet up with our green wire, and we're going to repeat that same process on the other side. Our brown wire will go to our taillight, except on the passenger side it's going to be the green wire going to your brake signal. Now whenever you start routing your brown wire underneath your Jeep, you may find that you don't have enough wire to reach the passenger side. Now Roadmaster is going to give you a butt connector in your kit to extend the wire out, but they're not going to give you any more wire. So you can find more wire here at eTrailer.com. you want to pick up some 16 gauge wire, and I went ahead and replaced the butt connector Roadmaster gave me with a heat shrink butt connector. Since it's going to be underneath the vehicle, it'll just have a little bit better protection. But we want to take our brown and our green wire, and we want to route it over to the passenger side and up to the tail light just like we did before. Once you have the passenger side done, this is what it should look like. Again, the green wire is going to go to our large connector on the inside, and then we'll have our brown and white wire going from the in to the out. And on the other one, it's going to be the same combination, except we're going to have our brown wire going in to the small connector. So now we can just take all of our plugs, connectors, and bulbs. We're going to plug them back in. Just make sure you click down on that red locking tab whenever you do put them back in so they don't come undone. Then we do have the option, there's a couple little sticky pads on the back of our diodes here. If you want, you can take those pads off and you can either stick it to the body or you can stick the diodes to each other, but I'm going to go ahead and leave them loose. That way I can see how my taillight's going to fit in there and where they need to be before I stick them together. Because we've got to make sure we have enough room to get our taillight back in place. Just going to have to move the diodes around a little bit till we find a pockets where they can fit in. Then we can take our push pins. You want to make sure that center section is still out. We'll push our push pins in. Make sure the base goes in first. Then we'll push in on that center section and it locks it down. We'll repeat that for the other side and our other remaining push pins. So the last wire at the back we should have is our white wire. Now this is going to be our ground. So we either need to find a factory ground that we can attach it to, or we can use the self-tapping screw they provide us with and we can find a nice solid piece of metal to attach it to. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually just bring my wire up right here because there's actually a couple layers of metal, so I'll have something really nice to grab onto here. So just take the excess, I'm going to cut my wire off. We'll strip back the end of it. I'm going to grab the ring terminal that comes in our kit, slide it over the end of our wire, crimp it in place. And I'm going to grab a 1/4-inch nut driver and the provided self-tapping screw they give us. I'm just going to go right into that metal. Now I do suggest that you kind of route your wire up so it's not hanging down. But again, we'll just take that screw and go right in the metal. And whenever you're tightening it, you want to make sure that it's nice and secure and that ring terminal isn't moving, but you also don't want to strip out the screw. Now up front here, I went ahead and removed the bracket because we're actually not going to be using it. Since we have these two posts that are on our base plate, our 6-way is going to fit perfectly right in between those. So we'll grab our wire. I'm going to take the boot off of our connector here, and for now I'm just going to slide it back pretty far back just so it's nice and out of the way. But if we look at the back of our connector here, everything is going to be labeled. At the very top, we're going to have TM for trailer marker. That's going to be our brown wire. We'll go counterclockwise, move over. That'll be GD for ground. That'll be our white wire. LT for left turn. That's our yellow wire. RT for right turn. That's our green wire. And just so you know, there is two different standards of how these are wired up. So the center pin is going to be your 12-volt power source if you have one, and the S pin is going to be for your electric brakes. But in our application, we're just going to be putting these 4 wires in. So what we want to do is, again, separate all 4 wires. We don't need to go back that far. We just need a few inches this time. So we'll just cut in between each one of the wires. Separate a few inches of it. We want to strip back a little bit of each one of our wires. Now each one of these terminals is going to have a really small set screw in there. You're going to grab a small Phillips screwdriver. You're going to loosen it up, but I suggest do not remove the screws because they're extremely small and really easy to lose. But we'll take our corresponding wire, put it into the terminal, And I always like to leave just a tiny bit of copper right outside that terminal so I don't have to worry about the set screw hitting the insulation on the wire and causing a connection issue. But you also don't want to leave too much to where it's going to touch another terminal and cause any kind of arcing issues. But we're going to go through and we're going to attach all of our wires into our plug. And once you have all your wires connected, slide that dust cover back over the back of the plug. And I always like to put a little bit of electrical tape and wrap the entire plug and the boot. That way it'll help hold the boot in place, but also help prevent any kind of dirt, debris, or moisture from getting inside. I also like to go as far up on the wiring as I can go. That way it protects the wire, but also hides those brightly colored wires in the front of our Jeep. So we'll go as far up as we can. And then in our case, we're going to be attaching our plug directly to those posts. So we're just going to reuse the self-tapping screws that came with our base plate and that bracket. Now the final step of our installation is going to be testing our wiring. I have mine hooked up to a tester, but if you know that your trailer wiring on your motorhome works, you can plug that in as well. So if I turn on my taillight function, you can see that both of them are working, as well as the left turn signal, my brake lights, and my right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. And that'll finish up your look and installation of the Roadmaster 7-wire to 6-wire Flexo-Coil diode wiring kit.